Welcome into the SunDevilSource.com postgame show. I'm Zane Hope and joined as always by Chris Cartman and Kevin Stewart. Arizona State right here on this field got their fourth win of Pac-12 play, 41-30 over Colorado. That now keeps them in second place in the South for now. But Chris, as always, like we always do, what are your initial thoughts?
Finally a game that actually went somewhat to expectations. Watching these teams play and studying Colorado, I felt like this was probably going to be a relatively close game. Low turnovers, probably more plays because Colorado plays a high number of plays game, but they run the ball 60% of the time. It sort of worked out relatively to what I expected. There were a few missed opportunities by Colorado. ASU had the blocked punt, which I thought was a really big play in the game. ASU continued to fight and come back, down by 2 scores on several occasions, and I think Colorado really wore out physically in the second half, and that ended up being the difference.
Yeah, we kind of talked before the game. We thought that ASU could come out flat, and they definitely did. But they kept working on establishing the run. They were able to do that. A lot of chunk plays, really turned it on in the fourth quarter, and came away with the win.
Chris, all year we've talked about, on the podcast or even on here or in written form, ASU hasn't played like they're built to come from behind. And, like you mentioned, they were down 10 3 times in this game. What were some things that allowed them to come back so many times?
Well, you mentioned the podcast, and one of the things we've talked about is they need to really focus on running the football. Figure out what they can do within base offense to run the football successfully. I think we even said on the podcast, go to more 2 tight end sets if you have to run the ball. Whatever it takes. They went to that 12 personnel look tonight where they had the 2 wing backs, CJ Frenchlove and Tommy Hudson. They ran the ball behind it really successfully, and then they stayed with it. In this game, you could have seen Billy Napier try to go to N'Keal Harry almost too much with Isaiah Oliver not playing, Colorado's best corner, but he didn't do that. And he even said after the game that Demario Richard played better as he got more lathered up, which I think we knew that about Demario Richard from watching him in 2015 when he was a 1,000-yard rusher. You give that guy the ball a lot, the other teams are going to get tired. They start dragging. He starts breaking more tackles. And then Eno Benjamin really came on. To my mind, his potential as a running back is about as good as anything we've seen in ASU in recent decades for a freshman. When Richard and Kalen Ballage leave, I think Eno Benjamin's going to pick up without losing anything. But credit Napier for realizing in the second half, even when they were down 10 points, we can still run the ball. I remember 1 2nd and 8 or 2nd and 9, and he just gave it to Demario, and Demario got 7 yards, and then again and again and again. ASU almost had a better fourth quarter running the football than it had any single game to this point against a quality opponent, and I think that is what I'll remember most from this game when you look back on it, a week from now or a month from now or whatever.
The headline's obviously going to be about the running attack, 381 yards on the ground for the Sun Devils. But, Kevin, another mix-up in the offensive line going into this game. Quinn Bailey moves into tackle for Zach Robertson to start out. How would you assess how they played at the point of attack?
Probably the best they've played all year, at least on running the ball. They had 191 yards rushing in the fourth quarter. Robertson played a little bit, but it was Bailey in the second half at right tackle, and I don't know if he's won that job off of tonight, but he did play well, and they were able to run the ball, like Chris said, out with 2 tight ends running inside. Richard, Benjamin, they had 88 plays run. They only had 2 negative plays, and that kept them in makeable down and distance all night.
I think Zane, it was Tony Romo. I was watching do one of the broadcasts recently, and he said people don't realize if you don't have tight end play, you're not going to be able to run the ball. And you go back to the early in the season, and J.J. Wilson is out there and just missing blocks and not knowing what he's really supposed to be doing. Nick Ralston, when they tried to use him as an H-back role, unsuccessful in that capacity as well, I thought. And C.J. Frenchlove, even though he's been injured, banged up, he apparently had an illness in the last week. They didn't know how much they would get from him. And then what Tommy Hudson was able to do. Those guys were really important players, even though you don't see ASU throwing the ball to them much or anything, and they won't get any publicity for what they did in this game. But they played a really important role, and this was ASU's offensive line's best play of the season, I would say, as well. So that's something that gives them a lot more balance. Manny Wilkins, when you have to defend the entirety of the line of scrimmage, because you got the zone read keepers, you have the ability to run in the A, B, C gaps, You have the ability to have the run replacements on the quick game and stuff like that outside. It just makes it really hard to defend. And tonight they really actually got that going.
And another huge component of this run game, Kevin, was Manny Wilkins. The most we've seen him run all year by far. And Coach McIntyre in the postgame talked about why it was so difficult. They were doing a good job of defending the pass and keeping him in the pocket, but just when it became time to escape, he was making plays. How much does that add to this ASU offense, going forward? I mean, we've seen health issues with Wilkins when he escapes the pocket. He tried to hurdle a guy again tonight. So, I mean, is this a good sign, or is this, something for Todd Grimm to cringe at?
Yeah, you don't want Manny running too much, obviously. You don't want to expose him. Last year, like when we played Colorado last year, he was basically playing on one leg because he was running too much and exposing himself. He was good tonight. He didn't get sacked. That was another positive of the offensive line, especially after last week. So he had 95 yards rushing, I think, no losses. Made a couple of good reads. I mean, there's the read option, you're not going to be 100% on it, but I think him and DeMario definitely have something going on the read option, and Benjamin looked like he could be a part of that too.
And, from the offense as a whole, Chris, we talked after the loss to USC about Billy Napier and how, it was kind of a weird game for him, the way he called plays. How would you assess his play calling tonight?
I thought he did reasonably well. Maybe still too many 50-50 balls for N'Keal Harry overall. You see the rate of success on slants and in-breaking routes it's very high. So I'm not sure. But then when they got hot before the half, and they had a touchdown drive before the half, a lot of out-breaking routes that were really successful. They went up tempo, which I think really worked out for them. So they've found success with pushing the tempo at times, especially in like 2-minute drill situations. That's been successful. But overall, just kind of knowing the feel of the team and reading the opponent, understanding when to press the run, I think he did a very good job with that overall.
Now, flipping to the defensive side, Kevin, who are some guys that stuck out to you?
The defensive line I thought played really well as a whole. Lindsey, I mean, was productive, but he wasn't like he was running down their throats, and it didn't feel like he was a big threat in the game. A guy that only had 4 tackles, but was kind of put in the spot, I thought, was Evan Fields. Came in first play, or maybe right away, they did a flea flicker at him. He didn't react well to that, but after that, no breakdowns, 4 or 5 tackles. That's kind of what you would want to get out of him in that spot, especially in a game like this where they had to win it and they were behind.
And then we talked a lot about Phillip Lindsay as a threat in the passing game as well, and how key the linebackers were in a game like this. You look at Christian Sam, DJ Calhoun, they were, again, all over the place tonight, and a big reason why Phillip Lindsay didn't have his best game of the season.
Well, I think ASU dominated at the point of attack. JoJo Wicker, Tayshawn Smallwood, AJ Latu, those guys played well. You had George Lee go out with an injury, his shoulder. He had it in a sling after the game. Renell Wren coming into this game had a knee problem, got hurt, went out, and then still went back out there and toughed it out. You got to give credit to Renell Wren for kind of toughing out through that situation. The linebackers did do a very good job of showing up in the gap when they needed to and making plays on Phillip Lindsay. He didn't get anywhere near as many yards after contact as has typically been the case, I would say, from this Colorado team. 22 carries, a little bit off of his average, but 50 or so yards off of his average. It was a very good defensive performance. Of course, Colorado missed some big opportunities early. The play that Kevin mentioned, where they targeted Evan Fields on the flea flicker, should have been a touchdown. Then they had the touchdown to Devin Ross that was dropped in the end zone. They had a wheel route to Lindsay in the first drive that maybe could have been a touchdown. It was close, where they ended up with a field goal. I thought the game really could have been 21-0 or something like that to start. So ASU got some breaks there, but the rest of the game, a lot of those big play shots weren't there at all. And I think ASU did a very good job of being composed and playing well defensively when trailing throughout much of the game.
They also had they gave up that 60-yard on the breakdown play, got down in field position, and then shut them down right there and held them to a field goal. Yeah. I think that was the one where Chase Lucas had that really good stop on 3rd down. That was a sign of him kind of growing, I thought, where he was beat, but he stayed with it, didn't break down, didn't get a penalty. I thought that was a big moment in the game to hold them to a field goal after that 60-yard play.
Chase Lucas actually played really well overall. Kobe Williams had a bust. I think it was probably Rhodes or one of the linebackers that broke down on the play you're talking about with Lindsay on the backside in the flat, and then he ran for all those yards. just kind of a busted play because they didn't get Montez down when they had an opportunity. But that might have been the only really big play opportunity that they had, like in the end game situation, like the last quarter and a half. Colorado had just 3 points in the final 20-ish minutes of the game. So you got to say ASU's defense actually did a really good job in crunch time.
So looking ahead now to UCLA, their star quarterback, Josh Rosen, has been injured. We don't know the status of him for next week. But, you look at Steven Montez, a guy who's, many will call a gunslinger, a guy with a huge arm, a big, powerful guy who can run. What are some things Arizona State can take away from this game, their performance against Montez defensively, and take over if they do have to face Josh Rosen?
Well, ASU's actually done well against teams that have had one really big play receiver, and Darren Andrews has been that for UCLA, and he just tore his ACL at Utah. So their passing capability from a personnel standpoint is really kind of more limited right now. And Josh Rosen, a concussion or whatever it is that's been keeping him out, I think this game sets up well for ASU in that respect. UCLA's run game really hasn't been firing on all cylinders, not just this year, but just in the last several years. And that still kind of remains the case. Those games have always tended to be pretty close and not really on the high-scoring side when they've been played in the Rose Bowl. So I would kind of anticipate that being the case again, just given ASU's style as a team and the way that its synergy tends to work out, not be these big high-scoring games, or at least kind of early on. I think that's going to be probably a toss-up game, but ASU's now put itself in a position where if it keeps winning, keeps hanging around, you never know what can happen in November.
Kevin, we keep talking about the unpredictability of this team, and UCLA, they have talent in some spots where they can have the same sort of evaluation. Where's this team at right now going into next week against UCLA?
It's a really big game just for Todd Graham. They win that game next week, 6-4. Oregon State the next week, Territorial Cup here. It's a big swing game. You got to kind of wonder where UCLA's at too. I know Rosen's supposed to play, but with his draft status and a concussion, kind of wonder, will they hold him out again? Does he even want to come back? We saw guys last year shut down. There's Leonard Fournette. Some other guys are predicted to be top draft picks, shut those down their seasons early. And ASU, I believe, was it last year where the ASU knocked Rosen out of the game here?
Yeah.
Too. So, it's ASU's got an opportunity next week, but, same thing, UCLA could really be coming back hungry for a win as well. You don't know. It's so up and down like we've been saying.
The way that I look at this is bowl eligibility, if it comes with a game or two to play for Todd Graham, is a big development because he still almost needed to win this game. This is kind of like a must-win game as I looked at it, because you lose this game and then you're pressing to try to win the last 3 or at least 2 out of 3 just to have a chance to have a good message to sell as you wrap the season up to your administration. Now they're in a better position. They're not reeling from a 3-game losing streak, had they lost this game. It was a real change of momentum, and it gives them a lot of confidence probably in the run game that they can take into next week. So I think they're now back into a pretty good place. Didn't look like, other than George Lee, there were any significant injuries that happened out there tonight, so they're probably trending in a better direction there. Demario Richards says that he had an ankle issue. And Tauta Latasi situation we don't know about. But Evan Fields is a better long-term prospect. I don't know that he's ready right now. Yeah.
Final thoughts from tonight.
Big comeback win, showed fight, coming back down 10 points 3 times in the game. First quarter, people thought it was over, and they kept fighting and showed some heart.
The one thing that you have to say is that the players have accountability to themselves and to the team, because it's very easy to say, well, what are we really ultimately playing for? Maybe our best case scenario is we have 4 losses and we go to the 3rd or 4th or 5th pecking order bowl unless something crazy happens. So when you're down 10 points on a couple different occasions, you could fold, and they didn't. And I think that you have to give credit. Their players are still fighting and competing, and some of the runs and the offensive line blocking are sort of illustrative of that. And I think that also is a credit to what this coaching staff has done, coming out off of 2 kind of disappointing seasons, and they're in this situation where it could go either way really, and they're sticking with it, and they continue to fight, and that's a positive sign for ASU.
The Sun Devils, again, 3 games remaining, 2 on the road, and then 1 Territorial Cup. That really could decide a lot for this program ending the year. As always, thanks for watching, and follow our content throughout the week.